Hello everyone. Once again, welcome to this course on Introduction to Modern European Literature. And this lecture comes as a continuance of the previous lectures, two of the lectures we have seen. And the last lecture, if I recall, it was on symbolism, constructivism, and one more movement of the time. In continuance of that, once again, I'll pick up three movements of the time. One will be aestheticism, another naturalism, and finally Vorticism. And if time permits, I might go into cynicism, though that was not a modern movement. It will have echo from classical Greek philosophy. And back to aestheticism. As you can see, the picture of Immanuel Kant on the side. Born in 1724 and died in 1804. He was a German philosopher, and this movement, aestheticism, owes its origin to this German thinker. It is also known as the quote-unquote aesthetic movement, whose headquarters was in France in the later part of 19th century. But then after that, having practiced there, influence from German philosopher Immanuel Kant, it is continental influence, over the Europe, and in English literature platform, pre-Raphaelites like William Hunt, Daisy Rossetti, or Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and Oscar Wilde can be seen as the influence of this movement, and aestheticism to a large extent manifests in their writing. What is its belief then? It believes that art is an end in itself. It is self-sufficient and there is nothing outside its own being. The watchword of the movement was, I quote, art for art's sake, unquote. Now this implies, when I say, or when the movement believe in art is an end in itself, it straightforwardly does away with the conventional notion of approaching a work of art. It might be literature or a painting. That it generally believe that the meaning owes its origin to the artist or writer or author or painter. It has something to do with the readers. It has something to do with the world or the context of the time. Generally, a text can be placed at the center of three things in the conventional understanding. That is, a meaning of a text or a work of art owes its origin in its writer. That is from work understood from the perspective of the writer. For example, if we want to understand the play of Shakespeare, say Hamlet, the conventional understanding also implies understanding of Shakespeare, but then aestheticism will not believe in that. Now, another side of conventional understanding is that author or the people who get a work of art has much to do with the meaning of that particular work of art, because when there are no readers or the point of reception of that work of art, if somebody creates a work of art and throws in the forest, for instance, and if it doesn't go into the reading of anyone, the art has no meaning at all. So that was another way of understanding art. And third way might be the universe of the time, the context of the time, at what time a work of art was produced. It has much to do with the meaning of a work of art. So these three things, writer, or the author, reader or the critic, or the context or the universe of the time of production of a work of art. In Shakespearean context, if we look for the universe of Hamlet or King Lear or Macbeth or Othello, that's the Elizabethan age. Whereas this movement does away with all these points of understanding, perspective of understanding. They say the art in itself is autonomous. To understand a work of art or a text, you don't need to, for instance, to understand Hamlet, you don't need to understand Shakespeare or the time in which the play was produced, or as such, or the readers or the audience of that play of the time. What is there inside the text will be enough. So the reader can approach a text, read it closely, and evaluate what is there inside the text. And what is there inside the text, or the meaning or the significance or anything pertaining to that text should evolve from the unfolding pages of that work of art or text. In a way, in this sense, this is a radical departure from the conventional understanding of movement. It is further other beliefs. The most important element of life is beauty. According to aestheticism, beauty is the most important, significant element of life. The purpose of art is to express beauty than morality. Beauty implies a unique, distinctive feature of things. Why a rose is beautiful? It has a distinctive feature, and that distinctive feature of rose itself is the beauty. Likewise, each and every individual human being, society or a species must have, or really they must have a specific point of significance, how they exist, what they are, and the significant element, but quite different from the others, unique from the others, can be understood as a quote-unquote beauty in aesthetic movement, and they believe that art should express that beauty. As I've said before, the movement is influenced by Immanuel Kant's view expressed in his book Critique of Judgment, published in 1790, and it states an object pleases for its own sake without reference to its external world. An object, for example, a flower or a tree or a pen or even a human being, if we consider it as an object. To understand what a tree is, you don't need to refer it to any other context. A tree is what it is. On seeing it, there must be branches, there must be leaves, there must be flowers, there must be fruits, there must be roots and trunks. All this contribute to the understanding of the tree. Not an expert geological critic or a professor need to approach the tree and teach other students or people that this is tree because it has branches and roots and flowers and fruits. So it has this movement has manifestation in literature also. The further depth meaning of the movement and its implication in the literature and its manifestation can be understood from those readings I have shared in the link already shared with you. Next to this is naturalism. It owes its origin to Émile Zola. Look at the picture on the right. Born in 1814 and died in 1902. So he was a French novelist. In fact, Émile Zola was influenced by a thinker named Hippolyte Taine. I'll come back to that. But before that, the French novelist Émile Zola is generally regarded as the father figure in naturalism. And here it comes. He applies the theories of Hippolyte Taine in his novels. His novel Thérèse Requiem, published in 1867, is generally regarded as the pioneer of the literary naturalism. So what are its principles or the beliefs so that it becomes a movement? Zola is inspired by the 19th century French critic Hippolyte Taine, who believes that art is influenced by three factors, or why art appears in society or market, why different genres appear, why people do sketches, why they paint, or why people write books, or why people practice dance, singing. According to Émile Zola, it is much to do with those quote-unquote RMM factor borrowed from Hippolyte Taine. His widely read book is The Philosophy of Art. Now, it is also popularized in literature by American novelist Theodore Dreiser in the early 90s, 1900s, and the work from him is An American Tragedy. The naturalists like Émile Zola and his legacy believe that environment or nature determines human character behavior. Zola and the practitioner believe that human nature is predetermined by hereditary laws in the nature. Having said this, human behavior, human nature, overall, a work of art will certainly have human characters and human relationship therein. In what form, in what role they appear, according to Zola, like thinker, is a heavy influence from the law of nature. And to understand this nature slightly, we have to reflect back to those three letters RMM term in the previous slide, RMM. Now here, Taine speaks of RMM as heavy influence on human beings, nature or the characteristic, their role, their attributes. R implies race, M stands for milieu, and M stands for moment. In other words, human behavior is heavily influenced by a race. Race means a historical lineage from the origin up to the present state of being of a certain person. What a certain person is, his or her behavior to a large extent is, according to Emile Zola, influenced or affected by that line of race. African race people, though racism might be an invalid theory today, it's a highly a political term, we cannot glorify it, but then it has impact in naturalism, so we need a slight understanding of this. Now that's race. African race, and then the Asian, European, they must have different behavior. Really they do, apart from being human beings. Their food habit, cloth habit, human relationship habit might be different. And according to Emile Zola-like thinker, it has much to do with the race. Rather, this behavior is a legacy and spillover from the legacy of race. Moment implies the time. The behavior of individual, according to them, is also influenced by the moment. For example, if we have to analyze Mr. David from any context, might be in US or India or Europe, the moment or the time when Mr. David lives becomes very significant. If David lives in Elizabethan age, his behavior will be determined by the norms and values of the Elizabethan age, and accordingly. But then if he is there during Victorian age, values of Victorian age, or if somebody else from Indian context lives during, lived during the freedom struggle time movement, roughly starting in 1920s up to 1947 under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, definitely the behavior of that person might be influenced by the idea of satyagraha, ahimsa, and self-sacrifice. So that's the time. So time is a significant influence in the becoming of a human being. And the last one is the milieu. Milieu implies the environment around you. It might be the natural environment or the human environment. For example, some might live in a cosmopolitan city, some might live in a village or a town. A person born and brought up in a cosmopolitan place, like for instance Mumbai, and a person born in Guwahati will certainly have different behaviors, pattern. Of course, this behavioral pattern of people from one context to another might influence the people of one context or the other context, and behavior are also human dynamics. But then a person brought up in such a milieu and a person brought up in another milieu, Delhi milieu, Mumbai milieu, and Northeast milieu, and European milieu, American milieu, it will have direct impact in the behavior of this person. And when writers in literature get this insight from this thinker, accordingly they will level their characters and their behaviors to a large extent. Their characters will be determined by the race of that particular character or the moment, the time he or she lived in, and the milieu. In other words, in aestheticism, we were saying just in the previous slide that a work of art is complete in itself. Okay, we have nothing to look outside to understand what a poem is, or a play is, or a fiction is, or a painting is. But in naturalism, at least we need to reflect on three things to understand the work of art, as naturalism and Emile Zola-like people will advise us. This can be critiqued. Our idea here in understanding the moments is not that to glorify all the moments, but to understand them critically. And in the course of lectures, as you go from one moment to another, we'll also get to know that how one moment heavily comes upon the previous moment, how it does away with the previous moment. Sometimes it also critique the previous moment, not only critique, it deviates from that also. So that's naturalism. Another movement that we have in our hand is Vorticism. This is from Ezra Weston Loomis Pound, popularly known as Ezra Pound. born in 1885 and died 1972. Pound was an American in the beginning, and he was in search of a literary platform. He was looking for the recognition of his poems, but then he didn't get such a platform in US, and he migrated to UK accordingly. And in UK, he established himself in the literary platform, English literary platform, and not only for himself. Ezra Pound will also have heavy, instrumental influence in T.S. Eliot and making him of his poetry. The poem, the greatest of the poem in the modern writing, and the Westland is perfected, edited by Ezra Loomis Pound. And when we go to that poem, the first poem, we'll see T.S. Eliot has dedicated that poem to Ezra Loomis Pound. So it's a big role. He has produced a Nobel laureate in a way, in that sense. It is a very short-lived modernist literary and art movement. It was started in 1914, announced in the magazine called The Blast. It is a British movement in that sense. Though Ezra Loomis Pound was not a British in the beginning. At the later stage of life, he will take British citizenship, but then actually he was American born. The name is given by Pound. Other pioneers are William Levish, a poet and painter, and Henry Gaudier Bresca, a sculptor. So these are the initiation and the initial influence of Vorticism. If we go further, it takes inspiration from science and technology. So yes, already the time Pound writes is the time of modernity, or the beginning of modernism, and accordingly Pound is understood as a modern poet, and Vorticism, as we are understanding here, is a modern movement, aesthetic movement. Images are basically drawn from three sources. These sources, that is technological sources, science. It uses geometrical shapes in art rather than landscape to arrive at abstraction. Geometry already implies mathematics, a scientific study. Rather than natural object, it tries to use natural objects like landscape. It prefers to use geometrical shapes to arrive at the meaning. But then the general understanding of this movement, or the basic line of thought and the principle, comes from the idea of a vortex. Vortex is a disturbance on the body of a water. For example, if you throw a stone on a pond, when the stone drops on that point, several encircling movement of the water appear, and gradually they increase and ultimately they disappear. It keeps on happening for a certain period of time. This is one example of vortex. Other example of a vortex might be what happens inside a whirlpool. It's a spiraling point in the body of a water where water rushes towards the depth of the body of the water. We'll find a spiraling point, and water goes in a spiral down. And what is more significant in this vortex is that whatever comes into the grasp of this vortex will be sucked up by the vortex. Say leaves, twigs, dead insects, animals, whatever come there, it will be sucked up by the vortex, number two. And number three, vortex suck them up, but then what we see is after some time, the sucked up objects will reappear somewhere away from the vortex. If a leaf had been sucked by the vortex, after sometimes 10-15 minutes, it might appear on the other side of the same body of water, and nothing changes without going any changes. A leaf will not be torn, a twist if it is sucked by the vortex before. When it appears at the later stage, the same twig will reappear again. So in vortex we see three things in general, beside many other. First, it's a movement, it's a motion. In other words, a poem should look like a vortex. It should look like a motion. And motion and action is an inspiration from science. It's a scientific phenomenon. And the example of leaves and twigs that I have suggested just now, that go inside the vortex, can be the parallels of ideas that come inside a poem. In other words, a poem should not distinguish in terms of subject matter. This is pure, for example, a subject matter, purely English is the best subject, and whatever African is the worst, or the Indian is the worst. Literature should do away with that. Whatever comes, whatever idea comes from any source has to be placed inside the poem. A poem should grasp these ideas. There should be space inside the poem, irrespective of categories, irrespective of race, irrespective of difference in culture. Overall idea matters in the poem. And the third poem, very crucial in understanding vortex, and the poem that Ezra Pound thinks of is the identity of those things taken by the vortex. The vortex takes anything that comes into its grasp, but then these things will never change. In other words, the identity of the things that go inside the vortex never change. Likewise, if for example, a poet draws certain ideas from African culture, African mask making, that tradition, for example, if it comes into a poem, the poem should not categorize it either that is bad or that is good. Masks should remain masks. But then the aesthetic side of the mask, the significance of the mask, why that mask was important and significant for the African or the people in general, human beings in general, what is its message, what is its aesthetic side, should be the focus of the poem. So there's three important points that from the vortex. A vortex is an action, a motion. Number two, a vortex sucks up any object, anything that comes into its grasp. And number three, anything sucked up by vortex does not change its identity, should be the characteristics of a poem as per Vorticism. A vortex swallows things, but after a while they resurface again. They do not lose their individuality. Some of the poems by Pound, like in his writings, we'll discuss them at length in following classes, will be an excellent example. Rather, poem written under the influence of Vorticism or with the idea of vortex are rather short, and they try to capture things in motion. In other words, the purpose of a poem is not to deliberate, is not to elucidate, is not to explain. The idea is to represent things in action with the technique of vortex. With that, we'll come to the end of this lecture, and when we meet next time, I'll speak about cynicism, another movement, futurism, and imagism. And imagism is also once again from Ezra Loomis Pound, though it is a very short-lived movement. It will be succeeded by other isms in the days to come. Thank you. Have a nice time.